Hey everybody, it's Ed. Before we start, I've got 3 Patreon supporters I want to thank. Dan Carey, Brad Berryhill, and Laura Hart. Laura, Brad, and Dan went to mountainprairie.com/support and they clicked on the Patreon button, and that is monthly support that has a lot of cool side benefits to it, including videos on a monthly basis, a behind-the-scenes newsletter, discounts to the Mountain Prairie store, a lot of other cool stuff. You can go to mountainprairie.com/support to learn about all the options. Thank you very much. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Monica Tranel. Monica is an attorney, Olympian, and mother of 3, and she's also running for the U.S. House of Representatives in Montana's Reformed 2nd Congressional District. Monica grew up in eastern Montana in a large family where she was one of 10 siblings. Throughout her childhood, her parents stressed the importance of hard work, curiosity, and independent thinking, characteristics that Monica has exhibited in all aspects of her athletic and professional endeavors. As an athlete, Monica began rowing competitively during law school, and after years of unwavering focus and tenacity, she earned a spot on 2 different Olympic teams. As an attorney, she devoted much of her career to standing up to a wide range of powerful corporate interests that were attempting to bully or take advantage of everyday Montanans. And now, as a congressional candidate, she's focused on bolstering Montana's middle class and closing the ever-widening inequality gap. Monica is in the final stretch of her campaign, so I greatly appreciate her taking the time out of her jam-packed schedule to chat with me. We spent about half the time talking about Monica as a person, her upbringing in eastern Montana, why athletics have been so important in her life, her high school and college years, her rowing and legal careers, and why public service has always been a part of her personal operating system. For the second half of the conversation, we talk about the election, the challenges facing the middle class, her commitment to Indigenous communities, the importance of thinking independently, an issue that she's recently changed her mind on, and much more. She also offers a ton of excellent book recommendations, which I always appreciate. A big thank you to Monica and her team for fitting this podcast into their busy schedule, and thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy. Monica, we share so many mutual friends. I've heard so many great things about you for so long, and I know you're in the home stretch now. You're cranking. You're doing a great job, and so thank you for taking the time. First off, I would love just to hear more about your background, because everything I know, you've just got this amazingly interesting background. It kind of reminds me of Theodore Roosevelt. Like the pre-politics stuff is just as interesting, if not more. And so can you just talk about growing up in eastern Montana, your family, how you ended up kind of on this trajectory?
Yeah, thank you, Ed. I really appreciate you having me on and this podcast and all the work that you do. So it's great to be able to connect with your listeners. So thanks for making the time for me. So I don't know. I didn't think there was anything special about the way I grew up when I was growing up that way, right? I mean, you just have what you know as a kid. I was the 6th of 10. Grew up in eastern Montana, went to kindergarten in Miles City, grade school in Ashland on the Cheyenne Reservation, on the Cheyenne Tribal Nation. And I have 5 brothers, 4 sisters, and now I look back and I think it was an incredibly magical childhood in so many ways. I mean, we had the horses pulling the sleigh at Christmas. I mean, we had, all of the magic of country life. We went sledding under the northern lights and just lived our lives as much outside as in, really. And one of the worst things that we could say about our siblings, if we were trying to be really mean to them, would be to say, well, you're an inside kid, or don't be a town kid. That was just kind of the worst insult that we could fling at each other. So, we walked to school, and it was just, we worked hard and we played hard, and it all paid off. We were expected to go to college. My dad was one of 13, and their dad died when the oldest was 17 years old. So he grew up in a family with, he knew true poverty and knew what it was like to not have shoes and to be hungry. And so he was the only one who was educated who wasn't a priest or a nun. So for him, education was really an important path. So we were all encouraged to go to college and to graduate school, and we all did. And my mom is also, she's Irish and very curious, and so just, gave us a lot of ask why. And really the messages that we talk about the most, if you asked any of my siblings, if you put us all in separate closets and said, what's the contribution speech? We would all tell you exactly the same story.
Really?
My parents would tell us, contribute something positive. Use your gifts and contribute something positive. So, and to this day, we call it the contribution speech.
I'm going to adopt that for my girls. That's half the reason I do this podcast is selfish, so I can take all these lessons. Talk about athletics. I mean, you're a hardcore athlete. How was that always a major focus when you were a kid?
I wouldn't say it was a focus. I would just say that it was part of the life we lived. It was kind of part of our lifestyle. I mean, we had horses. We used to horseback ride all the time. That was just something that we did. And summers we would play a modified form of baseball. My dad used to take us, and we'd go outside after dinner or after supper and play baseball. My dad had a rule that he was always the pitcher, and every pitch was a strike to move us through the rotation line. So we learned that when it was our turn at bat, we stepped up and took our best swing. We all got 3 outs, and I mean, that was how we were together. We played together. We rode bikes. If there was a way to invent a game or a sport, we made it competitive, and it was how we interacted. It was how we had fun. We were joking at one point when we were all adults. We took our bikes and were riding up Beartooth Pass, which is outside of Red Lodge, on the way to the park. And it was just funny because we were all riding up, and it was not this leisurely ride up to the top. It was a super competitive,
that's no joke. That pass is no joke.
I know. But I mean, we would play basketball until, it was too dark to see, and just, everything was go outside. We built snowmen with a front end loader, literally to make it as, a 10-foot high snowman wasn't high enough. So we had to get the tractor out and make it 20 feet or 30 feet or whatever. It was always, we called it the too much is best of all school that my dad was from. Some's good, more is better, and too much is best of all. So that was the school where we grew up.
All right. Well, that makes sense. And that was one of the things I had in my head was, you're obviously, you're willing to work extremely hard. You're competitive. And the sport that you ended up doing in the Olympics, I think is one of the hardest. You got to be half crazy to do that. It's so hard. And then I'm jumping ahead a bit, but I feel like a lot of your career has involved standing up to bullies and refusing to back down and not shying away from a fight when somebody's being taken advantage of. And so were you when you were a kid, when you were in high school, what were you like? I mean, you make really good grades. Were you a rebel? Were you standing up for people that are getting bullied? I'm always interested in how these adult professional bully confronters, how they were when they were in high school. So how were you?
I don't know. I guess you'll have to ask my teachers, but I was the sixth Tranel to come along, and so I had a lot to live up to. I mean, people knew who I was, and they knew the family I came from, and so I didn't, have a lot to, my older brothers and sisters were valedictorians and athletes and stars and their whatever. And so, there was certainly expectations. I mean, we were all still free to be our own person, of course, for sure. I think, my parents just raised us to think. I mean, my dad always said, it's not who you know, it's what you know in life that makes a difference, and to question right and wrong. And my mom was, as an ornery Irish woman, was very much questioning authority, like, how do they know? How can they tell us what to do? And, we were Catholic and we went to Mass every holy day of obligation we went to. And my mom was always questioning, like, why do they get to set the rules? Why do they get to say this? And I think it was an interesting time too, like in the 70s and 80s when, I think my parents felt like having a big family and settling down and being really committed to community felt for them, I think, in some ways a countercultural thing to be doing, just to be really rooted in family. And so my mom, I think, felt very much like she was making her own way in the world and making her decisions based on an internal moral compass about right and wrong. And my parents very much taught us about, we didn't watch TV, we read books, we talked to each other, we had a strong sense of faith, I think, and a strong sense of right and wrong. And so I think that, that's just like, what's right and what's not right. And so I think that was just really a guide. And then in high school, I guess I would actually give you an example maybe from middle school. Yeah. So in 7th and 8th grade in Broadview, Montana, where I went to middle school, we were taking home economics at that point, and I knew how to sew. I sewed all my own clothes, and I knew most of the home ec stuff. So I wanted to take shop. And no girl had ever taken shop before, but I wanted to learn the things that they were teaching in shop. And so they ended up letting me take shop, and it was great. I got to learn what the boys did. I was the only girl, but I think it was just like, ask questions, don't take things for granted. Don't, ask why you know what you know.
It sounds like, this perfect mix of confidence and humility, like questioning things, curiosity, but being confident enough to do that, which I think is, when I think about how I want to raise my girls, it's confident and tough and compassionate, that kind of mix. So why law school? You go to college, you went to Gonzaga, I believe, and then what drew you into the legal field? Because I feel like you probably could have done anything you wanted. What was so attractive about that?
Well, it's interesting because I think the sense of, being able, I worked for a law firm when I was at Gonzaga, and one of the lawyers in that firm said, becoming a lawyer allows you to think about the world in a different way. You'll have a strong sense of justice, of being an advocate, and you'll be surrounded by people who care about their world. And I thought, that's kind of like the way I grew up, really, and yeah. I don't know that, that's necessarily true of every law school, but I think that was certainly the message that attracted me to pursuing a career. And I do feel like the law is really continued on that trajectory of how do you know what you know? What is a sense of right or wrong? It's really about self-governance in so many ways, especially in America, which is what a big family is about. I used to say, well, why do the boys get to drive the car and I don't? Why do the boys get to do this and the girls don't? I was always questioning, like, that's not fair. And I think that sense of, going to law school and figuring out, like, what's fair, what's right. How do you set a fair salary or terms and conditions of employment? I think it was always really that sense of fairness and justice that attracted me to what it was about. But have you seen my mom's book?
No, I have not seen your mom's book. I have not. So, I love books, and I see all the books, but I haven't seen that one.
if you go online, you can Google it. It's called 10 Circles Upon the Pond. It's a line from a Thomas Merton poem. It's a book of essays on each of her 10 children. And so
Is
the
it
sixth
really?
chapter, yeah, so the sixth chapter is on me. So you can read it. It's not my story. It's my mom's story. I wouldn't necessarily have told that story, but it's my mom's story. And so if you're curious, I mean, I think she does talk about the sort of the fierce sense of justice that, I don't know, I think that's maybe just my personality. I used to always say, like, that's not fair. That's not right. You know, she has the bigger half. And then my sister would say, if it's half, it's not bigger. And I said, no, what you have is bigger. And I mean,
I know. Thanks for the book rec. I usually go pretty deep with the Google stalking before these things, and somehow I missed that. So thank you. I love, I mean, books is kind of,
it's Virginia Tranel. It was published by Knopf.
Super cool. So when you think about your legal career, I mean, it's been well documented, all the awesome stuff that you did, and I love people that stand up to bullies. I'm just kind of obsessed. And I think I never got bullied as a kid because I was always bigger than everybody, but something about bullies just drives me I mean, it really brings out the animal in me. And so when I'm reading your background, I'm just like, God, she's such a badass for standing up to these people. So when you think about everything you did, is there something that you're particularly proud of, like a particular case or a particular client you had, like what, just a highlight in your head? Like, I'm proud. I feel good. I made the world a little bit better by handling this.
I think there's a lot. I think that there are the small cases, small dollar, low profile cases where, somebody came in and didn't have a voice or, a voice of their own. And, they asked for help, and I think they felt heard or listened to. Mm-hmm. I guess I have two kind of moments that jump out when you're asking me the question right now. And one is for Marty Wilde, Wilde was his name. So he was a wind developer here in Montana and more or less lived out of his truck that's not quite true. He had a home and, but he was developing wind potential across Montana, and which requires driving around, putting up met towers, walking down a dirt road, being willing to get shot at, chased by a dog, whatever, and saying, hey, I'm curious about wind, and just doing it from the very, very, very beginning. And so he would get these met towers and get together, land agreements. And so he developed a wind project and, put 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears into it with no money. And he finally got a project and had sold it to this hedge fund in New York, and they weren't going to pay him. And he had hired a lawyer, a big white shoe law firm, and they had litigated this for a year, and they were just going down the rabbit hole, and he was spending a bunch of his own money and wasn't getting anywhere. And he called me and he said, I want to get paid. And I said, well, you should get paid. And I said, what lengths are you willing to go to? And he said, I'll take the project down with me if I have to. And I said, all right, well, let's get a restraining order and see if we can stop the upstream sales. And so we did. We got a restraining order. And within 30 days, he had a high seven-figure dollar settlement in his bank account. And we went on to do some other things, like take on Northwestern, and we filed some cases together. And he called me at one point and he said, Monica, I trust you, which meant a lot to me. But then we were doing this case and we had this hearing, and I had brought in some other attorneys to help me with it because it felt like a really important case, and we were going up against Northwestern, and they had a bunch of big, named lawyers on their team. And so we did this oral argument, and at the end of it, Marty said, Monica, you're best when you're unbridled. You don't need those guys. And those were the last words he said to me. So unfortunately, he died a couple weeks after that in an accident. But, so that's been a huge loss to me personally and professionally. But I think, he was a maverick, and he just was willing to kind of take on the world and do what was right. And, it kind of takes that kind of client too, right? Like, it's sort of that match of,
you were a team. You were all in together on this thing.
Yeah. And then I have a ranch client who I was doing some work for him, and we were in the end of a trial, and I was doing my closing argument, and I was just talking about what an incredible place he had, and how he's the kind of place that you drive by and makes you proud to be from Montana when you're like, look at that ranch, or whatever, and I could just tell like how much that made him feel respected. And I thought, I don't think people get respect enough, for the work that they do and how hard they work. But I mean, I can go on and on, like the trial I had where I was the lead counsel and there were probably 10 men in the case. And I was a single mom at the time. I took my girls to school. I made them breakfast. I made them lunch. I prepared for the trial. I dropped them off at school. I walked into the trial and I had this huge box of documents and the bottom fell out of it. And I was like, oh God, no. But you just carry on and you do your thing. And for me, I guess I think my family, we had no sense of entitlement and no sense of pretense. Like those are qualities that we just can't abide, pretense and entitlement. So you work your way through life, you get what you work hard and earn what you have, and, don't expect to, I don't know.
No, that makes sense to me. And I just keep thinking, back when I was in the real estate business, I had a developer pull the old, I'm not going to pay you, and if you want it, you come and get it kind of thing. And I was just thinking, man, I wish I had known you back then. You could have help me crush that guy. All right. One more kind of chunk of your personal life that I think is so interesting is you're an Olympian, which is wild. And then when I was doing all my Google stalking, it looks like you didn't start rowing competitively until after law school. Did I read that right?
Yeah. Well, actually, so I started rowing at Gonzaga.
Okay.
I went there, as a freshman and was walking across the quad. This is just a classic story that almost every rower will tell you happened, and they have the boat out on the quad and they're like, do you want to row? And you say, yeah, sure, I'll try it. And so I fell in love. So I was rowing at Gonzaga and I loved it. I just totally fell in love. And then I went to law school in Philadelphia, and I was actually in Camden at Rutgers in Camden. Yep. And then I went over to Philadelphia and walked along Boathouse Row, and I was just, I was really taken with the magic of it. I mean, it was just an incredibly special place with the lights, and I didn't really know there was anything like that in America, honestly. It was like, oh, this is amazing. It's just so beautiful, and people are out rowing, and I wanted to try it. I was just really drawn to it. And I think what I loved about rowing, honestly, was that it's outside. Mm-hmm. I think it just connected me to the way I grew up, like go be outside. You get to be outside all the time. And it was an incredible, just whatever you do when you're rowing, whether it's raining, whether it's hot, in Georgia when it's 110 degrees and humid, 100% humidity,
Yeah, I know that. I'm from North Carolina originally.
Yeah, or Philadelphia, when it's February and it's like the humid cold of the East Coast is way more cold than anything in the West, really. And just all of the different kinds of experiences. It's just a very visceral, real, it's you're sitting at the water level and, you can feel it. You can hear the bubbles underneath your boat as you're, sliced through the water. It's a really magical experience and very rhythmic and meditative almost when you're out there on long, quiet roads in the winter.
But the other thing that, I remember when I was in maybe high school, I read an article in Outside Magazine about elite rowers. And it was my first real introduction into people that were willing to go what I call deep into the pain cave. And so for all that beauty, you are going about as hard as you possibly can. And when I think about hard things to do, I do the Concept 2 rower sometimes in an all out 500. That can make, I can't talk for, a few hours afterwards. And so I've never done any competitive rowing, but I have an appreciation for just how hard it is. And that article I read kind of projected me into doing endurance sports, but different, easier endurance sports than you did. But when did you know you were good at it? Like when were you like, all right, there's something here. I can pursue this.
I don't know that I ever thought of myself as good at it. I mean, I just liked it. I really loved the sport, and I was too stubborn to let anybody tell me I couldn't do it. So I just kept going. And I mean, I was screwing around with it for a long time, but someone in Philadelphia, a friend of mine, said, Monica, when you decide to focus on this, you're going to be able to go as far as you want. And so I tried for the 92 Olympic team and I didn't make it. And then I'd graduated from law school. I was still, sort of knocking on the door of the national team. And I had to make a really clear decision. It was really the fall of 93 or 92 going into the 93 season when the Olympic cycle starts all over again. And it's really the opportunity to break in. And I thought, I'm going to put my whole self into it without any excuses. And if I don't make it, it's going to be because I wasn't good enough. It's not going to be because I didn't try. It's not going to be because I was doing other stuff. I'm no excuses. I'm throwing my whole self into it. And if I don't make the team, I don't make the team, and I'll be at peace. Mm-hmm. I will walk away from it and I'll be at peace. And so I threw my whole self into it, and I made the national team in 93 for the first time, and I made the quad, and we got a bronze medal at the World Championships, and it was the first time the quad had ever medaled. So that was kind of that was a great result. And then I think one thing just led to another from there.
I love that. I mean, I've got so much respect for rowers. It's so hard. Oh my God. So public service, when did that enter your mind? I mean, you've got all these different cool chapters of focusing on things, super intense, going as hard as you can, refusing to quit. At what point were you like, all right, I want more. I want to be on the public service side of things? When did that start rattling around in your brain?
I don't think I ever thought of public service as being segregated from any other kind of life. I mean, it's interesting because I've had my own business in Montana for 20 years, and I've been in the private sector, really, but I think the way we grew up was always thinking of public service as honorable. And I mean, my grandmother went west to Nebraska to teach school, and my dad thought so much of education, and so did my mom. My mom really did too. And I think we always thought of public service and service to your community. I mean, it's really that Catholic sense of economic and social justice. Like, you really do have an obligation to your community and to do right by your community. And that was the ethic that I was really raised with. So I think one of the things that I have found very real and has bothered me deeply at this point of our democracy, and I talk about in my campaign, is, I am tired of the disdain for public service. I didn't grow up that way. We grew up thinking that government was a good thing, and the way we have decided to self-govern as Americans is a good thing, and it's positive, and we should honor it, and we should speak about it with dignity. And I mean, we're the country that put somebody on the moon. We came up with a vaccine within a year. I mean, the government really did all of the work behind the internet and the research labs that we've had and the work that's been done and the investments that we've made that only government can make. They've been really amazing. And so why is it that we talk so negatively about government? I think that has to be called out, because it's not accurate. And what we're seeing right now is this just total demoralization and lack of trust in government that has been, I think, a really intentional effort for people who would subjugate democracy for financial gain. And I think it's wrong. And I think we need to, call that for what it is.
When I was looking, at all your material, I'm not a historian by any means, but I am obsessed with Theodore Roosevelt, and I'm getting more obsessed with Franklin Roosevelt. And I felt like when I'm reading your website, you're kind of a combo of the two. And, one was a Democrat, one was a Republican, but this standing up for the middle class, creating opportunities for the middle class, which is a core principle of has been a core principle of the Democratic Party for so long, and it seems like we kind of people are getting confused on that. And then, standing up to the elite robber barons of the day, which is what TR did. And, when I think about Montana right now, and I'm in Colorado, but I have a lot of guests from Montana, two things that come to mind are over COVID, just this influx of wealthy people that are coming in, all over the state, but particularly in the district that you're going to be representing. And they come in and they're driving up values. And then all of a sudden the normal people who've been there forever can't even survive. The property taxes are crazy if they can even own property. So like being in Washington, D.C., what can you do about that? How do you see what solution do you bring to that?
I think two ways. One is to really actually be talking about it truthfully and speaking truth to power. And I think that that's something that we talk about a lot as a sort of pithy little statement, but I think actually doing it requires a lot of sort of wherewithal. I mean, you have to be willing to stand up and look somebody in the eyes who's motivated to lie for money. And I've cross-examined those people my entire career. I know what that looks like. I know how they present. And they just are, not bothered at all by saying, we need X or we need Y, and it's all about money. It's all about money. So I think chasing that and following the money and whose interests are served by a certain outcome and speaking about that honestly, I think that is what's required. I think also being an advocate, being a fierce advocate for the working class. I mean, I was in a room of nurses last night talking to them, and I don't think that they've had a sense of having a strong, clear voice speaking for their interests. And nurses are getting physically abused right now. They're getting their noses broken. They're getting, not just nurses, all healthcare workers. It's suddenly become okay to throw feces at doctors. I mean, what is this world we're living in? And that's wrong. And I think we need people to be speaking out and saying that is not how we operate in our society. That's not acceptable. And not to denigrate everybody in leadership, because certainly there are a lot of clear, strong voices who are saying the right things and speaking out against those kinds of things. So it's not that there's nobody, I think, but I do think we need more of it. And I also think that being able to understand how, just to go to the heart of the matter, to say, where are you? Where is the money coming from? Why are you pursuing this position? How much money do you make from it? What interest, how much, what serves you in this? And, being able to look people in the eyes and saying, how much do you gain from this policy? You personally. And those are questions that I think that we don't ask because we're not supposed to. It makes us uncomfortable, whatever. But I do think it is about calling out the financial interests of people who are pursuing policies that are bad for a lot of people.
How do you think, and if this is just me, I agree with all that. But then when you look at the last four, starting in 2016, it's very clear that there's just no accountability for people getting financial gain from their political positions. And it gets called out, the Washington Post or New York Times or whatever, all day long, just listing it out. This is what, and nobody even argues. Nobody even tries to lie and cover it up. It's just like, yeah, I just think about something as simple as when, Trump makes the Secret Service stay in his hotels and he gets money. I mean, that's against the rules, yet it's allowed. So I just start feeling hopeless after a while because I'm like, man, nobody's enforcing the rules. What do we do here? So and you're an optimist. You're getting stuff done. I'm getting ready to start cussing. Sorry. But how are you going to enforce? How do you see those rules going back to being enforced?
I think it takes all of us. I mean, I think all of us have to step up and really lay down the expectations. I mean, at the core, Our American democracy is about trust in our institutions, and the way we have set up the framework of our governance, it works because we buy into it, right? We believe in the credibility of our institutions. But we also have the transparency. We also have skepticism. We have the healthy challenges, saying, well, what are you actually doing? And so I think we have to expect that law enforcement is going to do their jobs and, say, okay, you can't be biased. You have to be neutral. There are campaign finance rules we have to follow. That we agree on the rules of the game, right? And then we play by them. And when people don't, that we call that out and they don't get to play the game anymore. So I think, the example you gave of the rules were being broken and the people breaking those rules need to be called out and need to be held accountable. And I think that process is happening. I think it's messy and I think it's taking longer than we would have liked because it seems, this is right and wrong, right? Like, this is right. He broke it. It was wrong. He should be held accountable. But I think in America, we give everybody due process of law, whether we like it or not, whether we think they deserve it or not. But, even Donald Trump and even Ryan Zinke get due process of law in America.
Yep.
And that's the reality of the system that we all agree on. So it's super frustrating because it takes a long time, but that's the Constitution that we have.
Yep, I agree. And I think the thing I always need to remind myself of is that it is a long process, and it's long and slow for a reason. We don't want knee-jerk type things.
Well, and those chickens come home to roost. I think one of the things that keeps me optimistic is history. I went back and read David Kennedy's Freedom from Fear about Franklin Roosevelt, and I actually read the trilogy of Teddy Roosevelt by...
Those are my favorites.
Yeah.
By Edmund Morris.
Yeah, I read that, and I read Democracy in Chains. Lots and lots of really great thinking and analyses and writing. And then I think I would also point you to Butte, Montana, Butte, America. Our history in Montana is incredibly powerful, and we've had these awesome statespeople who have called out what is happening. And, Thomas Walsh and Burton Wheeler, they investigated the Teapot Dome scandal. And it was really out of that investigation that Congress got the right to compel witness testimony and subpoena tax records. And that's the underpinning for the January 6th committee. So those were our people. And the 17th Amendment, which gives us the right to directly elect our senators, that was in large part a reaction to William Clark's purchase of a Senate seat when he purchased the entire Montana legislature in 1899. And then the U.S. Senate said, well, we're not going to seat you. And then he went home, sent the governor out of state, had the lieutenant governor appoint him to the Senate. So these things have been going on forever. We are not in a new time. This is the human way. We are, we're good and we're bad, and our better angels and our not so great angels are in, constant contest. And I think it's who will prevail. And I think that's the story of human nature. And that's why democracy is so amazing and so worth working for, is because it creates an opportunity for our better angels to prevail. But we have to step up and do it. And I think there is a sense of ever thus. I don't think democracy is at the end of the road. I think we're in a low cycle. And so what an opportunity for all of us who care about it deeply to step forward and be a voice and make a difference, to be on the front lines. We have to step up now because we're called to do it. This is our time.
I love it. Thinking about Native American communities in Montana, obviously that is just a huge part of the culture and of life and of the history. And so how do you, in your role as a congressman, when it all works out for you, in a month, how do you what role do you see yourself playing, or what responsibility will you have with the Native American communities in Montana?
So this new district has two tribal nations, the Blackfeet and the Salish Kootenai, which is just north of Missoula here. I think that the stories of Montana, I think, maybe light up our imagination because of the Little Bighorn battlefield and, some of the more recent stories in terms of 150 years ago. I see the relationship between the federal government and the sovereign nations, the tribal nations, going forward as one of opportunity again. So I think we're at a point where we're talking about self-determination for the tribal nations, and the phases that we've had in our history have not been great. I mean, we have a history of breaking treaties, but the visits that I've had to the Salish Kootenai College here in Montana, they are restoring. They're one of the flagship colleges of Native Americans in the country. It's really super interesting, the Salish Kootenai College in Pablo, Montana. And they are actively working on restoring Native American languages, which is an interesting process because many of them were not written. And so they have to create a written language in order to be able to create libraries and then be able to teach it, because so much of that, what happened with the boarding schools and the severing of a connection to history and culture and language and tradition, was to make this what we're facing today. I think there are only 12 native Salish speakers now.
Wow.
And so trying to preserve and recreate a language it's a challenging process, but it's happening. And so I think the role of the federal government is to say, how can we partner with you? How can we help you? I think it's not for me. And I've been told by the Native American population that what they want is for me to show up and say, teach me, educate me. How can I be a partner to you? Don't show up with, here are my ideas, my policy ideas 1, 2, and 3 about what I'm going to do for you. I think it's more of I want to come to you as a partner and work with you and advance the goals that you see in your nation that you want to do.
That's great. And another question about just your evolution as a you're curious, you're a thinker. What's something you've changed your mind on over the years? I mean, it doesn't have to be in the last 2 years, but it could be with politics, but just a thing that at some point you thought you had it figured out, and you got more information, and you're like, actually, I was wrong, and I'm going to change my mind on that. And it could be related to the campaign or not, but I'm always happy when that happens to me. Like if somebody can convince me that the way I was thinking needed to be examined further, like that's why I seek out people with different ideas, because I'm like, best case, I'll change my mind. I'll realize I was wrong. And so can you think of anything like that?
That reminds me of the book Adam Grant's Think Again,
yes,
which
that's what I was thinking about. I just
finished it, and I think, he's saying, tell me how I'm wrong and tell me, how this is incorrect or whatever. And I think one of the things that comes to mind when you ask that question is a funeral of a guy in Philadelphia who was a big icon on the Boathouse Row. And when he died, someone said no one was too rich or too poor for him. And that kind of made me pause and think, it's important to take people in their humanity, regardless of how they present. You can come from the wealthiest walk of life, but still be very insecure. And so I think just trying to see people as they are and without assumptions, coming from my background and going into law school and in the rowing world, I always assumed that, people who came from a certain background or place in life just had a lot of confidence, and they knew exactly what, they were going to do in life, and just recognizing and appreciating that we're all trying to find our way in this world and everybody carries something. I think that allowed me to be much more empathetic and compassionate in my approach to people, because rich or poor, we all have our stuff that we carry. And I think, as I am campaigning and doing parades and connecting with people, what I see is this deep yearning for community and connection. I think people want to be connected again. I think people are really tired of the division. They want to know that I can shovel my neighbor's walk, even if we don't agree on things, that we can laugh, we can find things, but you can share humor with somebody with whom you have really deep philosophical disagreements about serious things. So I think that sort of, I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I think that just understanding the humanity of people, that people are complex and people can change their minds even when they are saying, they won't. So
yeah, well, it's an ongoing process too, I think, and I'm with you on the community. There's a book called Tribe by Sebastian Junger that talks about the importance of purpose and community, and that reformed my thoughts on community and the need, even the unpleasant parts of community. It's ultimately good. One other question: you're running as a Democrat, but everybody that I know that knows you talks about how you think for yourself, and so are there any specific issues that people may be surprised, like, well, she's a Democrat, but she kind of goes a little bit against the grain in this particular issue. Are there any things that may be surprising for somebody who just says, oh, well, Democrats think blah, 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 but Monica thinks?
Well, I've never outsourced my thinking. I'm not about to start now. So, but I do think, I don't know that the Republican and Democratic parties actually, I don't know that either one of them actually have a functional philosophy at this moment in our history. I mean, I think both of them are fairly dysfunctional in their own ways. But I guess I would say really standing with the working class, I don't know that the Democratic Party has done right by unions and the working class over the last 20, 25 years. I mean, certainly NAFTA, I don't know that the Clintons were a friend of the unions. And I think some of the intellectual arrogance from the Obama administration is coming home to roost for us now. I think that there was a sense of you had to be in government meant to be intellectually arrogant or to be a bureaucrat. And I don't think that's what it was really intended to be. And I would say, I think I most align with that sense of prairie populism. And Thomas Frank has a book called It's the History of Anti-Populism. It's called The People, N-O, The People Know. And it's a sort of evocative of Carl Sandburg's The People Know, K-N-O-W. So, and he calls it the history of anti-populism. And so what he's talking about really is that the Democratic Party has drifted into this intellectual and cultural elite that is as finger wagging towards the, populism as the Republican corporate group is. And so he, sort of poses a question as people shouldn't be forced to choose between two billionaire classes, one that's filled with resentment and one that is, the cultural elite. So we shouldn't be forced to choose between the, Bill Gateses of the world or the Koch brothers of the world. Like that shouldn't be the choice. And that's really what people have been presented. And I think that is kind of what the moment that we're in right now, where we have to reinvigorate the power of the people and to recognize, I mean, I see these people wearing these hats that say, we the people are pissed. And most of them are pretty conservative people. And I go up to them and I say, we are pissed. And a lot of us are pissed off, like I don't want these corporate barons buying up our public lands or aggregating our old family ranches and closing them off to the rest of us or whatever's happening, And I think that sentiment is cross-party, I don't know that it's not a partisan sentiment. It's just a sense of feeling like we all got left behind somehow. But that was an intentional effort. That was been a calculated, intentional effort for the last 40 to 50 years by the Koch brothers and their cohorts who really they, with the advent of Reaganism and the trickle-down taxes and all of that, it was designed to disenfranchise the power of the people. That's what they wanted to do. And they got a toehold with a coalition of evangelical Christians and had power and put in place an economic agenda that furthers their financial interests. And now we're finding, actually, these evangelical Christians, they actually want no abortion ever, no matter what, even if it would save a woman's life. That's actually what they want. And some of these Republicans who've gotten in bed with them to have power are saying, oopsies, my bad. I don't really want that, and so they've got to figure that out. But I think the Democrats also have to figure out that, the social network of support, we have to think through that too and think about how we can make that work. So housing policies, we have to, the federal government's housing policies, we're seeing 40 years of that, the chickens coming home to roost on those. And, the incentivizing of single family homes and unlimited development and mansion heights, wherever you are, whatever that looks like. Those are just not really sustainable development policies. So how do we address that? How do we talk about that honestly?
I'm glad you're up for the challenge, because when I hear this, it's a version of, I don't want anything to do with the rowing. It's too hard. And then when I hear this, I'm like, I'm glad you're doing it. You're better than me. And it's awesome. 2 more questions, and then I'm going to let you get back to doing the important stuff.
Okay.
You've mentioned a ton of books, which I really appreciate, especially the Theodore Roosevelt trilogy. Are there any other books that have played a big role just in your development as a human? Any favorite books that come to mind?
I mean, this is going to sound trite, but I read War and Peace when I was pretty young, and just the sweeping landscapes that they talk about. Really, I related to coming from Eastern Montana, and also the sense of the people having a voice and power. Angle of Repose, Wallace Stegner's books about the West. I love the book Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. It's just this woman who's this connector in the community it's just a very real world story. And I mean, stories give us the power to change, right? I mean, so
it's so important.
They are important. I always wanted to write. I thought I would be a writer. And I guess I'm finding that through this campaign, I'm telling a different kind of a story, maybe. Or maybe I'm the person who's telling the story for the people. I don't know.
I love it. So final question, or it's not really a question as much as asking for a statement. What is giving you hope? Like, what is, when you think about everything we're facing, how do we end this on a positive note? Any positive words to wrap it up?
I would say for over the last 15 months of campaigning and being on the trail, 40,000 miles on my minivan, parades, rodeos, meetings with elected officials, just regular people, senior centers, coffees, I have an incredible sense of hope for our democracy. I think it's alive. I think it's well. I think people are working together. And one specific example of that was a town council meeting. And these are all volunteers in this little town in Montana. And they had this town council meeting that they called, and the room was packed, and people in there were really, really mad. And they were talking about garbage. How are we going to get rid of the garbage? Where are we going to put the transfer station? Who's going to haul it? And it was just this heated conversation, and they were all really mad at each other. And, they invited all congressional candidates to speak. I was the only one of 9 who showed up. And they took a break and said, well, we'll let Monica talk now. And I got up and I started talking, and I said, this is democracy. Mm-hmm. This is what it looks like. You guys are doing it. And it's not what we think. It's not what we feel. It's what we do. And I think that's where I have hope, is we're doing democracy. It's messy. It's hard. It's not, it's incremental. We don't have this, we got there, we're done. We can just sit on our couch and relax. And, have a cup of tea or whatever. It's a process, and we have that process. We have that journey. And I think our institutions are strong. I think the middle will hold, but I think we have to hold it. And I think that's what gives me hope, is that I see people stepping forward to hold the middle and to say, we're here, we're not going anywhere. And that gives me an incredible sense of faith and hope. And I guess you'll just have to ask me how I feel on November 9th to see if I still feel that way or not. I might not.
Well, you've made me feel better. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. I want to hang this thing up so you can get back doing important work. But you're awesome. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Ed. I'm happy to clarify or follow up in any way that you need to.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.